This is GrizzPM, PM with the Riz, a little bit of a grizzled beard from experience, bringing you tech product management beyond the frameworks and with a little game. So stick around for industry perspectives on a wide range of topics on bringing better digital products to your customers and what it's really like to work as a product manager in tech. Hit subscribe if you're into it. I'm Taylor O'Neill. I'm GrizzPM. We're here to talk through the product management fun that we can have across an actual career in the tech industry and what it's really like, as well as our take on the different frameworks and all the pieces there. So we've got with us Sam Gensburg, who I worked with on launching some amazing products like a social media video platform and more. So I don't know, Sam, if you want to give like a quick intro of like what you're all about.
Hey all, I'm Sam, user experience designer by trade. I love helping people do things that they could not do by themselves. I always try to start with why, get to the root problem, and make something better.
Just to kick that off on what is product management. So you'll see a great essay out there called A Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager by Ben Horowitz. So sadly, it's not one of his writings that includes rap lyrics because almost every chapter when he writes a book, that's his style of what he likes to incorporate in there. But it is a great classic essay. You'll see it posted up on the Andreessen Horowitz page at a16z.com. And the term they use, which is really controversial, so you see it on Twitter or whatever, that the product manager is the CEO of the product. So that may be a bit much because the actual CEO is really the CEO of the product in a lot of cases, especially these product-driven companies that you'll hear about. But the idea of having someone that has ownership of a particular product, that could be an entire app, it could be like a feature in an app, like the product manager for notifications in TikTok or something like that.
I think at the biggest, at scale, the simplest way is a product manager will keep the engine going, make sure that everyone is doing what they need to do, that there's a roadmap in place so that there's a predictable outcome. Product manager will be the communication between the product that's in progress and business, as far as what's happening and any blockers that might impact timeline, outcome, etc.
Gotcha. So that sounds kind of a lot like project manager, where you own a project that's a, given space of time with like a defined start and end. It may end up, having subsequent follow-ons or things like that. And you're responsible for scope, timeline, and like a budget. There's kind of another part of product management that sometimes it doesn't even cover some of those pieces. They might have a dedicated project manager or other functions might cover that, but that sort of design sense or product sense that they talk about a lot. One of the things we talked about in the last week was sort of the idea where Steve Jobs was talking about product sense in regards to Microsoft software versus Apple software back in the day. And he had a particular point of view on having really high standards for sort of user interface and design and the experience of products, both in software and hardware. And that he claimed that certain other companies did not have that same kind of sense, that took sort of a style and it took sort of humanities thinking that like enabled that. So what do you think about that sort of intersection of product management and a little bit of design on like what product sense is that might be a little bit different than a normal project manager?
Are you saying in this case, it's like setting that big vision? You get the example of Steve Jobs relative to Microsoft.
It's like when you pick up something like an iPad initially, and like when that first came out, you would be able to give that to a kid and then let's see what happens when they click the icons on the screen and they're suddenly, playing a puzzle game or Fruit Ninja slashing around. Things that you really didn't have to like give them a manual to read through, probably because they can't even read, but they were able to like initially figure all that out. So there, must have been some sort of, design work ahead of time and some sort of research. There's a lot of different approaches to how much you do and how much you talk to customers that we can get into. But sort of a difference between that and if a bunch of us just sat in a room and started designing the tablet of the future without talking to anyone and mostly had sort of kind of engineering mindset where we built out every single feature we needed and we never maybe talk to a 5-year-old to ask, how would you use a tablet device? And then it would take us a couple of years to build out that. And by the time we did, not sure if it would actually meet that needs of the end user.
Definitely agree with that. And understanding who your user is essential in order to create the right level of criteria for what is success. And if a 5-year-old is your demographic, you better be talking with 5-year-olds. I hate when somebody comes along and they say, I want my product to be for everyone. Well, if it's for everyone, it's for no one. There's no way to measure what use cases are going to be most prominent and what demographics. And without having some testable, actions, being able to actually talk with the user, set up, experiences to try and gauge effectiveness, you're really not going to have a well-rounded product.
One of the main differences between the two is this connection to the customer and the connection to the strategy. Whereas usually in a project mode, you're really receiving the strategy that hopefully was based on some sort of customer connection or sales connection to customers or B2B sort of world. But in this case, and it's kind of hard too, and we could talk about this in our careers too, is when you have an actual project, do you have time to do the sufficient connection with customers and actually talk to them or not? And then what do you do as sort of a proxy between that?
Definitely had the constraint where whether it was time or budget, we weren't able to adequately reach out to a group of actual users of a thing. There are ways that you can do different research. I think it's less effective, but it's something. You can either pull from existing studies, do friends and family testing, even if that's not explicitly your demographic, not ideal. But yeah, there's definitely ways to address the situation. But I think it's important as a team to note the risks. Sometimes it's referred to as a risk log. This is a list of things that, hey, if we're not doing this the way that you hired us to make the thing, whatever it is, in the best way possible, and I'm letting you know that you're not giving us all the tools to make the best thing, and here are the risks of not doing this. And as long as they're cited and documented, this is a good, at least first step. And by the way, when you note this, some folks might listen and say, here's some more budget, here's some more time. So it's worth asking.
What do you think of, there's this idea that when there's a whole new category of something, that research is not maybe as useful. I mean, the cliche they talk about, Henry Ford styles, if you ask someone like the research for a car, they probably would have asked for a faster course. I don't butcher the actual metaphor there, but the idea is if it's a totally new category, sometimes it doesn't really apply. Even when it's a paradigm shift where they go from the BlackBerry with the keyboard where you're actually using that on a cell phone to the iPhone's full touch screen in 2007. And that maybe the customers you would have talked to would be like, I really need my keyboard with the physical keys. And they would have rejected that at first. And it would have been a mistake to follow the customer research on that because they couldn't really envision what their lives look like when you had a fully touch screen where you could have infinite possibilities for buttons and things like that.
Right. So in the instance of a car, if I showed somebody a car for the very first time, you're right, they wouldn't know how to operate it. If you did explain, gave a bit of a tutorial, if you will, well, that would imply that if you had to give a tutorial that it wasn't initially intuitive. Okay. And it's brand new. So with tech today, we try and make things as intuitive as possible. But if it was a groundbreaking thing that had to be in an unintuitive way, okay. Once you give the tutorial, now you can weigh, hey, how was your experience with the car versus the horse of going 100 miles in this car versus going 100 miles with this horse, or 10 miles, or whatever the instance is, having some sort of a side-by-side comparison.
Yeah, innovation kind of opens up a whole new can of worms, and we'll cover that in a subsequent week, because sometimes what's super innovative is actually very crappy in one area and incredible in the others, and that's kind of what true disruptive innovation is like, because there's a lot of nuance to how that works. But going back to products, so that's kind of that beginning, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper on that why and the research and connection to the customer, and because that's really the differentiation for the value of a product manager. And there's these sections of being a product manager on the strategy side. So you're like defining the vision for the product and your audience and customers, like you talked about, like who are we trying to reach? Not everybody. And then where do we position our product on that, since we don't want to be something for everyone? Maybe when we eventually scale, like, Instagram started out as the bourbon app and it was for a small set of people. And now it's almost everybody, but not quite. I mean, there's still differences between the different platforms for that, but at least, finding like a need that you can really dial in for that subgroup of people before you can scale to other groups. And then compare, like I was saying, with the different platforms, apps, sites, whatever you're trying to accomplish, where do you compare with everyone? So that's huge. And then, like you were mentioning, creating a roadmap. So across the different frameworks, like roadmaps and features and everything, have a different structure of how you come up with them, rank them, and execute and deliver, especially between Agile and Waterfall, Lean, and some of the other variations that combine them. How you then write these user stories of things that users want to accomplish and what the benefit is for them. And then that comes up with a backlog for a development team, designers, and everyone to coordinate together to launch stuff. So that allows you to plan your sprints, of like 2, 3, 4 weeks, these chunks of work you can deliver, and then come up with a process to get to market. So that's kind of the whole spectrum of product management, as well as like the layer of how you get things done and what methodology to execute.
Yeah. You were mentioning planning, 2 or 4 weeks in advance. I think it's important to note that the nature of Waterfall, you have everything planned out to the T, for the next, sometimes, 6 months, a year. And life doesn't always work that way. What happens when there's a hiccup? What trade-offs do you have to, do? Is that deadline really locked? And if so, something needs to give, whether it's tweaking or losing a feature, adding more manpower, if that is a solution that would actually help. Sometimes it's not. Whereas going in those smaller chunks, you can be agile, unintended, I suppose, with your timing. And, sometimes you go a little faster than expected. You can get in a new feature, or depending on whether or not we're doing iterative development where something's actually being pushed live, you can get feedback when I'm doing the next round of features. And I can understand, hey, actually that thing that we thought was going to be really successful, it's not as successful as we thought. And we're either going to pull it or tweak it or whatever. But yeah, understanding what's important to you at that moment in time while you're building and while you're learning.
Waterfall way of doing things, which, it's been around for like 70 plus years. And we talk about the iron triangle project management, which is scope, time, and cost. And when we think about that, we generally usually think of like older 1950s style Department of Defense, Boeing, designing the new 787 or 737 MAX 10 or whatever it is. And you've got like a 4-year development cycle. You write out extremely detailed requirements. So that way you can validate that they're okay. And especially when something's that like mission critical to have well-developed engineering tests on everything, and they've done that for decades, that might be the right process. There is a risk to that, which we can address with Agile. Like you mentioned, it's like being able to, as we're building it and launching things in market in these minimum viable product ways, which we'll talk a lot about what that means and doesn't mean, but a way to solve problems for customers where they can actually, do something where we can learn from it and maybe not have that all perfect in every pixel, in every scenario, in every path that someone might do. So maybe that's something like you need to combine 2 accounts in like some service that you have. And on day one, you don't have the ability to do that. You have more of a happy path for something like that. But what is kind of different that I haven't heard as much of people talk about in these sort of videos is that even though that seems like outdated 70 years ago, a lot of the ways we interact, even in tech companies or companies that use a lot of technology, is that there's still a lot of waterfall there because, there's a reason for people wanting comfort that their requirements are taken care of, and there's a roadmap and a predictability that some of these things will launch. That said, there's a lot of need for being able to test and learn and be in the market and be able to execute before someone else does. And so if we spent all of our time upfront on requirements trying to make them perfect and then waited till we had it all developed, then someone probably would beat us to it or the world would change. So if you're working on an AI product last year and you had, a year of requirements and then certain things happen between like October and February, you'd probably have to throw it all away and start from scratch. But if you're going in Agile, maybe you could have pivoted a little bit and adjusted tack and not had so much throwaway work. Is that sort of your take on things, or do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do typically agree for the type of products, the digital products that I've been working on. Most of the time, I think that an agile approach is the answer. And yet, I've also worked for Fortune 500s and other companies that have more protocol that work with external teams, where it's really not feasible to be as agile as you'd like. When you need to do something and get approvals, or somebody from another team in Poland needs to develop something and send it over to you, and they're going at their own pace, you're at their mercy. And so understanding what those constraints are, and if everyone's aware, it's not for every situation. With that said, the principles of Agile, the ability to keep everyone informed of your progress and where you are when you're able to, makes a lot of sense, especially because the thing that I'm doing, I might be saving somebody a lot of time or saving myself a lot of time if we all communicate a little earlier and discover certain constraints.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to actually bring up the manifesto for Agile software development. So I know the tendency, even on every project, even this week for me, there's a lot of talk about methodology and a lot of strong opinions on how that works. There's, Agile, Scrum, Kanban. There's also related design thinking, kind of more upfront. There's a combination of all of these as well. So I've actually even just recently saw a great combo of all of those with a little bit of a flow to it that made sense. You kind of don't want like a hodgepodge of things, but at the same time, if you can find a way to sort of solve for some of those issues, it's interesting. On bigger organizations, we'll see things like scaled agile framework. And everyone likes to have these debates online over that. But just going back to the fundamental principles, like the manifesto for Agile software development, you can read the history about it. There's a lot of interesting things there, but they're trying to uncover better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. And they do that through a few key principles: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, which is quite a bit different than, like we talked about, that upfront process for Waterfall, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So that's kind of an interesting one as well. Like we've said, when I went to grad school and we talked about negotiations and business law and everything, the contract is really only as good as the kind of agreement between the people that are signing it and the goodwill there, because you won't be able to read between the lines and find a good way to align on everything. And you'll just choose the definition that works best for you. So customer collaboration is really where you're trying to find win-win situations, and responding to change over following a plan. So there's no sense in executing a plan that's going to send you right over a cliff. If you have to adjust tack, then responding to change is a huge value.
So at the end of the day, you need to do what's right for you and your team. If you are located in different areas of the country, establish some core hours. How do you like to communicate? How do you like to receive feedback? Taylor, I know when you set up a team, it's typical to get everyone in a room, virtual or otherwise, and talk about some of these things, the constraints that exist, the preferences for communication and other tools. And likewise, we have a similar conversation with our clients to understand, again, communication, but also like if something goes wrong, and it will, because this is the nature of a project, something might be unexpected. What does that look like? How does communication look like? And it'll be different for any given team, even if it's at a singular internal company, to kind of thrust all the protocols onto everybody when it doesn't work for everybody. It's pretty silly, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. We're spending this week talking about how best to work with each other, especially across time zones, across the world. And, some people have a preference to chat it out just in Slack, and some Zoom, and some face-to-face, and everything like that. And trying to figure out what works well a team is really important. There's the 12 principles list that they have in addition. And what really stood out for me is the measure of progress is working software. So there is a lot of sometimes other types of stories and tasks we work on that are technical debt type things or catching up things, but your ultimate goal really is software that works. And I've seen some of those larger enterprise projects. You'll see these enterprise resource planning projects out there like SAP and Oracle. That's, it's 30 billion of revenue plus going to those companies that have been for 50 years. And those projects can be 2, 4, or 6 years long. And actually having working software might not happen for a long time. So it's kind of hard to keep that momentum and end up delivering a successful project. And a huge percentage of those fail because of that structure. And they worked with ways around that and to try to have interim goals or different methodologies of implementation. But working software is the measure of progress. And so if that's your guiding principle, that's your metric that you're driving towards, that sort of helps you look at different scenarios or different prioritization and be like, oh, we're actually not moving towards working software. It sounds basic.
Taylor, what's your take on minimum viable products?
Yeah, I think that actually ties back to what are you trying to do as a customer and how are we trying to have that customer accomplish something? So I once launched a project that is now, has billions of dollars flowing through it. At the time, it had zero and we were late to market, and there's, a lot of stakeholders involved. There's, the brand wanting to have the best website possible to sign up for this software as a service product for consumers. And every day that it's not launched, there's millions of dollars down the line from the business perspective, but from a customer perspective, they just want to make it happen. And we have a lot of these different stakeholders the logo isn't there. The pixels are off by 3 pixels, but we can't change it because of the structure of the menu and everything. So it's going to be a few more months to launch. It's like, all right, let's hold on this. To me, the minimum viable product is whatever we need to put there that will work for the customer to get that done in a way that kind of also works for us. Like if it was just like the logo wasn't even the right company, that's like one thing. But if it's like reasonably there where you're not going to get like a lot of complaints and, it meets legal requirements and it's reasonably fast enough and the experience isn't terrible. It's like, will you be able to, maintain the standard of your brand for that customer? And are these other things just nice to haves or they can be fast follows? So it's something we could do just a little bit later. So I see a minimum viable product, whatever we need to do so that they can do their task in a way that doesn't, maybe diminish too many of the other factors.
It was Jack Dorsey. He always, especially with Twitter, had a penchant for putting out product first and learning from it. And it didn't necessarily need to be pretty. Fortunately, a lot of the stuff, well, I don't know if it's fortunate, but a lot of the stuff, it's just so simple and basic and aesthetic and whatnot that, we as consumers might not be explicitly aware that it wasn't meant to be, more complex or robust. But yeah, like if it's a feature, let's figure out if it's a desirable feature. We can style it later. We can make it better later. Is anyone going to use it for its basic core principles?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's even earlier stages testing out ideas, especially if you're creating a startup and you're like new to things and maybe it's you and me, we don't have a developer, like even testing interest with a landing page. So if you said, sign up for Groupon and you didn't even have a developer, which I believe is the story. So there's a lot of great case studies on that where it's just like, here's a landing page and we just, put it together in Microsoft Paint or whatever you got going on out there and just have an email sign up to see if people are interested and then kind of worry about the next step of like, okay, maybe we do something manual. And the manual thing is like, we call the company, we like fax them over a coupon and then we put the image on there, and then we can work on automation and developing code, architecture, all that stuff later. But that also touches on sort of the Facebook early on thing, which is controversial and kind of evolved on the move fast and break things as the quotes that people like to argue about online, and that, may fit well for obviously not for like a Boeing, but for Facebook. But even then, they have our personal data and things like that. And it depends what, you're trying to do and what that actually means. I know some of the Facebook co-founders and early C-level people or senior product managers talked a lot about like what that means. And there's a lot of nuance to that, but, being able to launch something without hundreds of approvals, and some of the larger organizations, you'll get to this idea that I talk about, like having everyone has a veto. And then so there's always one person out of hundreds that will say no. And if you get into that state, then nothing ever gets built, or it gets built way too late because you're going so slow. So you want to have some ability to have a clear decision maker that takes in all these points of tension and, legal risks and all these other like factors that go into that, and still be able to make a decision and move quickly and getting that out to market and learning from customers. So, launching threads on Instagram is probably a case like that. Like it could have waited another year, but the timing was right. I don't know how things now are probably dipping a little bit after that initial excitement, but they could have done that later and probably been way too late. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on moving fast and breaking things.
It's definitely a lot easier when there's less people in the room that are better empowered. So to that end, if I'm with a client and their boss is there and their boss's boss is there, sometimes the CEO shows up. My question is why? Can one person, and it doesn't need to be the top dog, just somebody who has the power to approve a vision, to move forward, to have the check-ins. Other people can be aware, but at the end of the day, this one person who is regularly there to step in and give the thumbs up, a consistent person, that's who I want in the room. Having 10 people or 100 people, as you said, it definitely slows down the process substantially. You're not going to please everyone.
Yeah, that goes back to that everyone has a veto is what I call it, where I've been in like an environment where it worked perfectly. Like you were talking about, we actually had a CEO that was like really visionary. He kind of a little crazy, but had this like huge thing of like anything we did, he was like, what would it be to 10X it? Just, tell me we can talk it through. I'm up for it. And we had everyone have their input. We had deep input from legal, brand, social, all these different groups putting into that input. But we knew there was, in this area, there was a senior VP that was empowered by the CEO and the CMO, and that he would then get that input from legal and be like, oh, well, you could launch this, but, it's got a 1% chance that, this type of thing might happen with text messages. So text messages are a silly example, but there's a Telecom Protection Act, the TCPA, and almost any text, there's like a lot of issues with suing if you accidentally received one that's promotional, even though we were very careful about that. So they would kind of assess these risks, but they could make the call. So we knew how to like set up the project where we get all the input, we have our recommendation, they greenlight it, we go. And so that was really the fastest executing team I've ever been on, where we could go from idea to a call center, to the website, to being in a store, to on a billboard, to on live TV in like 6 weeks. And other companies might take 2-3 years to do that, which sounds crazy, but that's actually pretty par for the course. But when you're all aligned, you can go and launch things at 2 weeks or 6 weeks after you learn how to get your team working.
It's so interesting because a lot of the reason the company does take so long to launch a product is they want to get it right, whatever that means for them. And I just think it's ridiculous because we live in a world that moves so fast, that things are ever changing, that you have assumptions about what works, and you really don't know until you push something and get a response. So did Threads, for example, come out too soon? Well, we've got some feedback. We saw how many millions of people signed up. How are they using it now? What are they liking? What are they not liking? Facebook can now react to that. And they have users live, will continue to use their service or not. And they'll get more feedback from that as well.
Even if they don't use that particular app, the learnings and everything might translate to another. The example they usually give for that is like, I don't know if everyone remembers the Amazon phone. My mom actually just found hers the other day, some random box. Long forgotten. There was a few innovative features on there too, but it was basically a failure. But a lot of that team, a lot of those learnings went on into Alexa and Echo and beyond, and so all these other devices that they're experimenting with. And so it may be a failure in one way, learnings in others, because it is the base of a lot of the things that were to come. So get it out there and get learning. So taking a step back to product managers in general. So the only figure I could find out there is there's 43,603 product managers in the United States. I've got a citation for that. I'm not sure if it's accurate. If you ask ChatGPT to calculate it, it is very specific. It's from Zippia.com. It says, so if you ask ChatGPT, there's two ways that you can do like estimations, like bottom up or top down. And you could say, hey, there's 2% of a company or product managers, and then you take the number of companies in the US. It's very much like a consulting style question, one of those annoying brain teasers. Then actually there's a paper on those that they do not predict job performance. So have fun in your interviews telling them that. You probably won't get the job if you show them that their questions are not helpful. But the number, I guess, 43,000. There's a lot. You'll see them across companies from traditionally, like I was talking about, like the Boeings or the Procter and Gamble's in Cincinnati. Shout out to P&G. I have a lot of students that end up going there. Or you're talking about like the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, or Meta, whatever you want to call yourself. I have all these companies switching names on me. But yeah, it's kind of come out of the marketing type area and the physical products that we were thinking of before, and then really got adopted pretty deeply into tech. And there was a bit of a shift more towards this product thinking versus project thinking, as there was more ownership of strategy in those Silicon Valley companies. And early on, Google's famously sort of a little bit anti-project manager and more pro-product. And now there's a lot of interesting conversations online of like what's kind of taken back more by engineering and maybe product marketing. So there's a little bit of a different flavor of that. In the news with Airbnb that I think is shifting more to an Apple model, but it's kind of getting further down the line, just the value of a product manager. And Sam, did you end up watching the Poolside PM video? I have two interesting product management videos to check out today. The one from Darby, I think we looked at it last year.
I did not look at it. No.
This one is interesting. So there's a lot of those, the day in the life videos that everyone loves and loves to hate, where you like watch someone only the highlights of their day, where they go into a tech campus, which I've only got to work on one of those $1 billion tech campuses once. And it was right before COVID and I was working for a travel company. So that did not last long. But, they go to the like bike room and the exercise room, and then they have 9 different types of coffee. And we did have at least 9 in the office I was at in Seattle. And they like Facebook has the ball pits that is like a hot tub that they throw the like play pinballs in, or all those sorts of things. So you see those, but there's this one posted by this PM who's really able to talk about the value of product management called Darby. And this was a controversial, it was a year or two ago. And it was kind of funny. So whenever you show those travel pictures, like I do a lot of these videos, sometimes some of my students give me these like, oh, it's like a humble brag. You're in Sayulita and you're working on Tableau. It's a little bit of like jealousy and maybe not understanding the value of your role. And what happened was it kind of exploded when she was by the pool working on her laptop doing product management. And there's all these comments that came across from like engineers saying product managers don't do anything. And that caused it to go viral.
What's a PM? We help prioritize and help the engineers stay on track and help them know what to build so that you have a product to use.
Yeah, exactly. So you might have a team, like the engineers actually do the developing, the coding, which is the impressive part. Designers also do the impressive part, which is everything you see when you're in a software. Product managers essentially decide what the team's going to work on, do competitive research, prioritize bugs, keep everyone focused, motivated, and driving towards business outcomes. So that's what we do. And we work from home, which means you work from the internet.
So this is our office today.
But there's also a lot of engineers kind of defending the role of a product manager in the comments. And then there's some really interesting response videos that Darby posted. And then an interview on a great podcast called One Night in Product. And she's really able to talk about the value of a product manager. She clearly understands the value of that. And the engineers she worked with would give her comments like, hey, I don't want to do those things. What I love to do is coding, and you're able to, work on scope and work on the stakeholders and be able to organize us and how we do work. And I love having you do that for us. So that's one I definitely recommend checking out. But if you could pull up another video, so this is from this week, and this is a little bit less on the role of a PM on that side, on the structure of a project, and more so on wearing that hat of a customer and product feedback. So whether you are receiving that feedback from a customer, or you're actually playing that role of the customer and criticizing something. So this is Feng Fushi on TikTok, and it's posted on Twitter as well. It's a great video. It's just a really interesting product thoughts on Microsoft Outlook's web client. So something that we've all used for many years. And there's obviously the desktop software, there's the phone client, and then there's the web interface for Outlook. And there's a lot of different perks and different features that are live on some pieces of that and not others. And some are a little bit interesting. So she's got some UX UI feedback on the experience.
Whoever designed the UI for Outlook, the app, go f*** yourself. What the hell is wrong with you? Oh my god. It pisses me off to know that someone who's getting paid like probably 5 times my salary approved this shit. If I'm trying to log out of my account, what words am I going to look for? Sign out. Log out. No, Microsoft thinks, delete my account. Who in their right mind is clicking delete account to log out of their account? Like, if I'm trying to sign out of an account, I'm going to click sign out. I'm signing out. I'm removing it just temporarily off the app. I'm not deleting my entire email. Oh my god, like I just spent 10 minutes on this app and I'm clicking every possible button. And the one button I did not press was delete account because this is my work email and I'm not going to click that to f around and find out. And so I finally cave in after like 10 minutes and I just get so frustrated. And the wiki page is like, oh, girl, just click delete account. And when I finally do, there's a little disclaimer on the bottom that says, oh, this is just removing your account from the app temporarily. Like, that's logging out. There is enough money in Microsoft to where they are able to do user testing. So who the f*** greenlit this? Related note, Microsoft, hire me. I can do a better job. I promise you.
There's like a interesting process where we're talking about how you've got a large company, you've got millions, possibly billions of users, you've got multiple teams. And like I talked about before, you could be a product manager for a whole app, or you could be one for just features. So when you're talking about a massive organization like that, you could very well have like, a product manager just for calendar, or like even a subset of that, or product manager for the settings and for like the inbox for spam, all those things. So you've got a lot of organizing pieces that are hard. So that's like the classic, how do you steer like a boat or a cruise ship sort of issue. There's a lot of cross communication and all of that. So that's all of the excuses for why a product isn't good. And good is kind of in quotations, but there's some pretty obvious misses on a lot of the products we use every day. And I'm sure you experience this when you buy new hardware, casting things to a TV, you're connecting to Bluetooth, you're signing up for a new account or resetting your password. There's a lot of things that probably aren't crisp and on point and perfect, I would guess, for you. They definitely are for me. And drive me a little bit crazy. And Ellie, I believe, Feng Fushi has some very unfiltered thoughts there.
This is totally an everyday occurrence where somebody wrote something in a way that does not resonate. Now, noting something as delete is such a destructive action that most people, especially when it comes to business, take 10 feet away from this and they say, I don't want to be responsible for deleting anything. And that turns out that's not what it meant. So yeah, all it would take is a couple of interactions, actually talking with some real users. Although honestly, it seems like you could have talked with most anybody about this that was outside of your group. Definitely staying outside of people that already have a bias is super important. Very much seems like no one was spoken to about this. No research.
Yeah, like that's, I guess, why it really resonated for me. It was like that double hit of like, this is really, really obvious. Like, this is so painfully obvious. I cannot believe it would have gotten past any of those gates to be actually in the product. Like, it's concerning. You're like, I hope those people aren't in charge of things like the space shuttle or whatever, because like, what happened? That do not pass go. But it's also when you hear that refreshing honesty. So when you're in that environment, in those walls with all the incentives and you're competing for resources, then you're trying to get a good rating. And there's a lot of problems with that we can cover later on at careers or whatever. But you want to get, maybe they have 360 feedback and the person that you would have said, no, that's stupid to, is the person that you need to have feedback on for your own career. So whatever it is, it's broken. Perhaps, if there's a pattern of those things, maybe it's just a one-off. But it's interesting to see the refreshing honesty she has there. And I know a lot of times that's why I got to make sure when I'm on Zoom, I'm on mute. I might be saying something like that to myself as I'm going through there. And, we do have those strong emotional reactions to things. We do like to criticize a lot of the products because we put that same hat on because we want to be like our users, and they're the digital products that affect our lives that we're using all day long to accomplish everything, whether it's like our cars and it's having to reboot while we're driving, or there's things that are so important to us. So it's not just this little digital product or little thing. It really is important. So if we do have this sort of aggressive, sarcastic, sort of super honest sort of feel to some of our feedback, I think that's okay. And also, recognizing those teams are working really hard and they're real people too. And that, they just want to make products good as well as we do. And we also call them to make some better stuff. So a lot of that stuff sucks and they need to do better. So that's why we're here, to have that point of view to drive us to better digital products.
At the end of the day, it's important to know that you are not your core audience. You might be a member of that group for certain reasons, but you are inherently biased and you are a user group of one. So no matter how intuitive you think something is, and I've early on in my design days, I made that mistake of just assuming something, low risk, and it being one of the biggest issues. And this is a perfect example of that. In addition, it always benefits you to test in advance because it is so much cheaper to move a few pixels in, Figma or whatever design program you're using than it is to make a tweak in a live product. Tremendously. I'm a biased designer here, but it is always worthwhile for anything that there's a level of risk for.
I knew you were really interested in diving deeper into product this year. So what made you want to take a path deeper into the world of product?
Inevitably. So there's three parts to product. Your manager, who represents is it good for business? You've got design, is it good for the user? And then you have the developer, is it feasible? The communication of these three, and there certainly is overlap, but we all need to make sure that we're representing our part so that you come up with a holistic result. Inevitably, I find myself communicating a lot between design and product management. Sometimes we'll be the ones to write a story, as we have good insight as to what the criteria might be. I started design in industrial design and graphic design, and there was a good deal of creativity and novelty for the sake of creativity and novelty. In the world of product, it's just a lot more pragmatic, and there's different ways to approach a problem and solve a problem, and a lot of them require hypotheses and good, healthy communication amongst everyone. And so those are skills that I feel within the group of product that PM can communicate well throughout. And so those are skills that I wanted to pick up on and learn to better own those skills so that I can communicate better with the team.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, what I really liked, especially working with you, we're on our design jam sessions and we go from that Post-it note to the reality. It's the cliche, but we're jamming on ideas. We're creating an app and a website that people are going to be using all around the world. And then you see them actually use it. And, not every space of careers and work, and especially in business, do you actually get to see something come alive like that and see it provide value for people and see them smile. If you walk into certain arcades in the US now, there's a kiosk that, my team was working on, and it makes it smoother and easier, works better with their payments and everything. And it's just fun to see that come alive, and it's fun in the process and working with the team. So love to work with you on another team in the future as well. So, all right. Thanks, Sam, for talking today. We'll talk again soon.